So, for the beginning, an easy question. What do you think is maybe the biggest impact of the shift from substitute decision making to supported decision making?
You want to start?
For the people, for the society, for what is the biggest impact, or what is the most important thing that supported decision making brings?
To my regard, it's definitely the empowerment of the person with disabilities and this shift and this understanding of how important the autonomy of the person is and their ability to make their own choices and to empower that ability and to go towards more autonomy of persons with disabilities.
Yeah, and also for the people themselves is a new understanding of their level of responsibility, because listening to the voices of someone means in effect that you're giving them the power to make decisions about themselves, and that power includes the responsibility of the consequences of the decision. So this is trite stuff, but with rights come responsibilities. And the dignity of the human being is equally identified in terms of the things that they're empowered to do and the things that they're responsible for. So that's another side of this issue.
Do you have any thoughts?
Sure. The shift to supported decision making from substitute is, I think now people as human beings can be a human being. They have their personhood, they're being given an opportunity to be independent, to have their own lives, where in the past with the substituted decision-making process, that opportunity was taken away from them. And that almost aligns with to have respect for the person, to not only have the respect, but they should have the dignity, for themselves and for others. And also, it shows that they're humans and they can decide. They have the capacity, not just looking at mental capacity, it's looking at the capacity that they have the right to vote, to be in a relationship, to make decisions about their own lives, even if it's unwise decisions. So I think that shift is a very powerful shift to have that power within them.
Why do you think that in the past substituted decision making was preferred in most of the countries, and why is the change happening now, or why it was happening in Canada? What was the force behind it?
Well, two questions. Why did we have various forms of guardianship, and we're talking about a spectrum from guardianship to complete autonomy, and it's a spectrum that everyone fits into at one point of their life in different places. We haven't talked about this, but there's an interesting overlap between the issue of Article 12 and people with disabilities and children, because it's not entirely clear why the number on your driver license, the number on your birth certificate should make a difference in whether you have the capacity to make decisions about yourself. I've often wondered why it is that we don't allow 4-year-olds to make decisions about themselves. If it's not a matter of mental capacity, then what is it? They should be respected as human beings as well. They're just smaller human beings as well. So in that spectrum, the issue is one, can either be viewed negatively as one of controlling a population that you don't really trust, or as one of managing a population of people that will cause you less trouble if you have them under control. Certainly the lack of guardianship applied to women, and probably in many parts of the world still applies to women, ineffective guardianship. So this is not restricted to disability issues certainly is not a modern phenomenon, it's an age-old phenomenon of just identifying people whose decisions you don't particularly want to recognize or trust, or respond to or live up to, and taking that power away from them. And issues of disability are forefront now because of political events in the last 40 or 50 years. Once again, the CRPD is the tip of an iceberg. It certainly didn't invent anything new. Absolutely nothing in the CRPD is novel. It is all built on decades and decades of many other movements as well. So, specifically why it came about now is probably just a very complex combination of ingredients, political and social, and a number of things.
And I think it's important to mention the role of the groups of disability, DPOs, disabled people's organizations, and the role of the persons with disabilities in the writing up of the CRPD towards this shift to supported decision making. So I think they gained also power throughout certain associations at the international level, which were, I think, fundamental to get this into the convention further at the state level, at the national levels.
Mm-hmm. I think if we take the example of the United Kingdom, for years and years there have been advocates, persons with disabilities, and there was a big movement of disability scholars moving in the direction of human rights. Like, for example, if you look at the Human Rights Act 1998 and the Discrimination Act in the UK, that all together brought a full force of disability scholars and advocates to push from the guardianship laws towards support, and then the government listening to the voices of the people because of the advocacy campaigns that were running in the country in the 1990s and early late 1980s as well.
And so this shift from substitute decision making to supported decision making is maybe a long-term process, and it's only starting now in Czech Republic. What do you think is at the end of this process? What is the perfect situation, the perfect world where it is, or is there anything like this? Is there like a...
Well, we just go to the convention for that. I mean, it's treating people the same, on an equal basis with others, using that phrase. And it's important that we focus on that phrase because through political oversteering and other kinds of understandable phenomena, there's a slight misunderstanding that we're all, I mean, it's not an issue for people with disabilities, it's an issue for people. And given that fact, everyone should be in the same kind of relationship to each other without differentiation between a classification of difference. Everyone has different collection of features and capabilities and the rest of it, and those things should be taken into account as they are relevant, and not taken into account when they're not relevant. So the end is not people with disabilities, unlike other people, get to decide their own fate. Surely not, and the convention does not doesn't provide special rights, which has been said over and over again. So the end result is that I put it in various papers is disability disappears.
And others are aware, and it's implemented in the overall awareness of persons, being it persons with disabilities or not. I think the awareness raising still has a long way to go.
Well,
and it's then the part that we'll need to, that needs a lot of work before we get to this actual end.
I also question it because now, as you can see there's these capacity assessments that are taking place, and what the CRPD states is that we have to move away from these capacity assessments because it's not a best interest issue. And if you want to move away from that, it's not always having these assessments for persons with disabilities, because they have the capacity, that's full legal capacity, having full autonomy. So if it's an ideal world, an ideal Czech Republic, it's to move away from these full guardianship regulations and having capacity assessments done, not looking at from a medical perspective model on how capacity is assessed, but also moving away from social service provision level as well. So then it's equal recognition before the law.
That's not entirely right, because we don't get rid of physical assessment, because how else would we know whether a person needs a wheelchair or not? So assessment is an extremely important thing to recognize the difference between people. In the case of capacity assessment, yeah, I mean, how do you know a person needs support? Because you do a capacity assessment. How do you know they need linguistic support?
Yeah,
because you test to see if they have capacity to speak, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
the problem is to use it in a way of excluding people. If you use it in a way to empower them, saying these are the resources you need. We've done the capacity and you need these resources.
So what I'm saying is the mindset needs to change when it comes to the capacity assessment, and not based on a medical model, because instead of asking how can I assess your capacity for you to make that decision, I should ask what kind of support do you need to make that decision.
But you still need to have an understanding, a medical understanding of the level of need, because that's what, I mean, if a person cannot speak, that is a medical assessment of their capacity, and that's why you provide them the services to make it possible, say with a bliss board or some other communication device, so that they can speak.
Yeah, but once that happens from a medical perspective, then they say, okay, this person might not have the right to make the decision. So to move away from that kind of...
Well, then we won't give people the resources they need. I mean, we're not going to be able to say that there are no differences, because to say that there are no differences between people is detrimental to people who have needs. You have to identify needs, and those are differences. They don't have to be identified in a way that segregates people, but empowers them. So there is a shift in mentality, but you get away from a functional understanding of people's capacity. And the people who suffer are the people who have needs.
I think the question is also who needs to identify those needs. Is it a medical assessment?
Or someone who can do it accurately, scientific. Medical is probably an appropriate word.
Probably people need training in this area.
Well, if it's
for medical doctors or psychiatrists.
Yeah, I don't think it's a medical, I mean, it's an assessment issue. So roughly it's scientific. So you need some way of assessing capacities. I don't really think a doctor has the training to assess certain kinds of capacities. I mean, you go for an occupational therapist, would be a much better place.
For the physical.
Or physical therapists.
Social workers.
Or social workers, probably have more experience.
So, if you were to assess some measures, for example, measures that we have in the new civil code, and assess whether these measures are really supported decision-making, what principles would you look into? What would be the principles that you were looking and saying, yes, this is supported decision-making measure, and this is not?
I just go back to equality, because I think at the end of the day, whatever, I mean, if you're looking at principles, the only principle is equality. We should treat everyone according to the needs that they have. Some people need a lot of support, other people need very little support. And it's different every day, probably. So you just are conscious of the level of support that a person requires, so that they're all finding themselves in an equal position with respect to decision making.
it's what and it's what the person requires.
Yeah.
As you say. So it's the own decision of will and preferences of the person to require support.
Well,
through advanced directives or set out in advance or these agreements, support agreements.
well, that's it. A question we didn't discuss. So, suppose someone says, "I don't want support."
That's okay too.
It is. It should be.
Yeah, if they don't want support, they have the opportunity to say no.
To support,
Yeah, because they have the right to say no or yes.
Mm-hmm. And this supported decision making needs to be institutionalized in a way? Does it need to be in a law? Or can it just happen naturally in the community?
Well, it's happening in both ways. There's, of course, you need to push for some legal structures moving away from substitute decision making, because ultimately the law is an authority, and that's what the legal processes, the court proceedings will look into. But at the same time, you also have informal support, from informal decisions to a policy level. Like, for example, the person-centered plan is a form of support, and a circle of support or peer support doesn't necessarily have to be in the regulations, but it can start from a very friendly, open. But then I think there does need to be certain practices in place for it to be implemented, for supported decision making to be operationalized in a clear way. Because now there's so many countries working on the support. There's lots of normative and philosophical concepts of supported decision making, but now I think further research needs to be done in actually looking at the process and the outcome of supported decision making.
Yeah. And if you're looking at CRPD, the safeguards are important, applying to support. There is always a risk that there's undue influence or that independent authority should overview. I don't say this authority should be a legal authority, so it could be less formal than it should be less formal than the current system, but definitely some protections.
But are we then just replacing one structure with another and doing a very similar thing and basing it on the protection, which is protection of the person?
The safeguarding of the person. Yes, it's a thin line, but I think there needs to be training in this area, because substitute, you make a decision based on their best interest. Support, you look at the will and preferences. So I think people might get confused because it's a new area as well. And I think
I'm reminded of a study that was done some years ago with people over, it just so happened to be a study in aging, but people over some age, I think probably 80, were asked with respect to medical decisions whether they would want to be asked for consent to medical treatment. And the overwhelming response is, why ask me? I'm not a doctor. You do it, and I trust you. Do what's best for me. So in a case like that, for people who don't want to make a decision, but want someone else to make a decision, what do we do?
If they want it.
they don't have it.
So that means that if individuals say, I don't want to decide, I want you to decide, I want you to be a guardian over me, what do we do?
I think that can be written in advanced directives, no?
Power of attorney.
On the power of attorney.
So well, the question is, how much do we dismantle? I mean, if we keep something like a power, enduring power of attorney, so the individual, do they have to do that in advance, or can they do it at the moment? And they say, at this moment, I want you to decide. No, I mean, some of these details, and your concern is how much should be embedded in an institutional setting. And I guess the reason that we keep asking that is because we haven't solved the problem of what is the outcome, the preferred outcome of Article 12. If you say that people decide, doesn't solve the problem, because if people decide not to decide, then you need something in place for that individual. And the rest of it is if people decide to do things that are dangerous to other people, you need an institution that prevents them. So you can't just say, let people decide what they want, because that's not what all of us have. So, I mean, the question is always this frustration of saying, well, the outcome should be, you know, it should be equality and what we all have. Well, what we all have is we're restrained in our actions because we're civilized human beings. We are under regimes of law and regulation and all these things because that's what it means to live in a social setting. And there should be absolutely no reason why that shouldn't apply to everyone. Everyone should be treated equally. And what that means is there's restrictions on your autonomy. That's what it means to be, that's what all of us have. So it's just an unfair restriction of autonomy that we have to separate from a socially responsible restriction on our autonomy. Because God knows we have to have our autonomy restricted. Or else we don't live together.
Yeah, and maybe last question, it's a little bit connected to what you talked about. Could this whole process of shifting from substitute to supported decision making benefit also people who do not have a disability, who do not get into contact with people with disabilities? Has any kind of benefit for the whole society or for the society as a whole?
Good question.
I would come back to previously what we said about awareness raising. I think that's the first thing. How can you change that mentality of persons who are not in touch, who don't have a disability? If you keep on using the substitute decision making, then they will never consider persons with disabilities as equal as them. So, but yeah, broader. Of course, I want to say yes, but now I need to argue.
I think also the attitudes needs to change, even among the general population, for it to be pushed a little bit further. And normally this is done through advocacy movements of persons with disabilities, or normally if you look at a lot of people, it's who have a personal touch or a personal relationship with someone on a social level that actually understand, about, what people go through. And,
if there is discrimination is abolished, I think it can only be beneficial for everyone.
Well, my answer is much simpler than I think everyone has a disability. So obviously benefits. If you don't have one now, you'll have one soon enough, if you live long enough. So there's people with disabilities aren't a minority group. They're everyone. So, well, out of that, they're everyone. It's part of what it means to be a human being, to have some level of decrement and functioning in some place. If not now, then later. As you can see by the way I'm walking now. Disability is the universal phenomenon of humanity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.